Welcome back to the channel. We're back on our Commander deck profile. Today with Ojer Axonil. Deepest Might. For 2 and 2 red, you get a 4/4 with trample. If a red source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, instead of dealing the damage you would normally deal, you deal damage equal to Ojer's power instead. So we have a couple things that will power up Ojer this way. Instead of just dealing the 4 each time, we could be dealing like maybe 7 or something of that sort. But a lot of this deck is just dealing 1 damage after 1 damage, which transforms into 4 damage after 4 damage. But yeah, that's the general overview of the deck. Let's get into the card by card for the first of the Lost Cavern of Ixalan commanders that we're covering. We have Arcane Signet for a little bit of mana, Commander's Plate, which will allow him that little bit of a stat boost along with the protection from everything other than red. Also allows him to get in for that swing if you need that, but mostly a stat boost is what we're looking for. Fire Diamond for some mana as well. Lightning Greaves will allow him that targeted protection in order to make sure he can't be targeted by your opponent's stuff, but also just being able to swing in with the 4/4 is also nice sometimes. A Ruby Medallion will allow us to cast most of our stuff for just 1 red instead of 1 and a red, but reduce the red spells by 1 for each of them. Soul Ring for some additional mana there. Swift Boots to do the same thing that the Lightning Greaves do. And then Wayfarer's Bauble for some additional lands. Because we're in red and we're going to need a way to get those. For our creatures, we only have 12 in total, with most of which do basically the same thing, dealing 1 damage to our opponent anytime we cast a non-creature spell or an instant sorcery spell for some instances. Coruscation Mage does that exact thing, except you get 2 of him on the board with the Offspring ability. Electric Static Field, whenever you cast an instant sorcery, 1 damage to each opponent, but once again, we're not worried about our opponent getting us removed before we can get rid of them, because we're dealing 4 damage to them each time. Airborne Flamesmith, 1 damage to each opponent for each instant sorcery. Vibrant Archer, non-creature spell, 1 damage to each opponent. Gutter Snipe, 2 damage to each opponent, but it doesn't really matter the 2 versus the 1 because Ojer is going to be getting his power dealt to them. Casting Flame Breather, non-creature spell, 1 damage to each opponent. Mycetian Elder, it does create you a wizard, so that wizard doesn't benefit really off of Ojer's ability, but it's still just another way to deal that 1 damage to each opponent off of that ability, because we like seeing that, and sometimes you just need that last final push. Nahab the Eternal, being a post-combat main phase, add red mana for each 1 life your opponent's lost this turn, so even if you had just like an Electric Static Field and Ojer on the board, and then you have this, you'll be getting that 12 mana already, and I think we could find some things to do with that. Rampaging Frostodon. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, Rampaging Frostodon deals 1 damage to that creature's controller, except instead of dealing the 1 damage to that creature's controller, we're dealing the 4 or 7 if we have Commander's Plate on the board. Razorkin Needlehead, first strike during our turn only, but that's not really what we care about. Whenever an opponent draws a card, deal 1 damage to them or 4 damage to them. We don't really have many ways to make them draw cards in this deck, but, just 4 damage at the start of every turn. Nice ability there. Thermal Alchemist, 1 damage to each opponent. Untap him anytime you cast an instant sorcery. So basically 1 damage anytime you cast an instant sorcery. And Unruly Catapult, 1 damage to each opponent, and then untap anytime you get an instant sorcery. So like I said, if you have 1, 2, 3, wait, sorry. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 different ways to deal our opponent 4 damage just by casting 1 instant sorcery. So it's already 32 damage. If we could swing in with them, I think we win the game. Or at least eliminate 1 person. Following that, we have our enchantments. For Burning Earth, whenever a player taps a non-basic land for mana, deal 1 damage to that player, except you deal 4 damage to that player. Commander, most people don't play many basics, so they'll have at least 3 or 4, so that's 16 damage at the start of their turn, plus another 4 from Razorkin. Oof. Claws of Valakut for 3 mana, enchant creatures +1/+0 for each mountain you control and has first strike. This entire deck is just mountains and any specialty lands you want to run, but also first strike with the trample is really helpful, but also, maybe if we get them up to 10 power, and we have just 4 of the 1 damage dealers, that's already an elimination. Fire Your Inscription, whenever you cast an instant sorcery, 2 damage to each opponent. We don't really run the damage doublers or triplers in this deck too much, just because it doesn't really matter for Ojer's ability there. Because it does it's like two different replacement effects there. But yeah, like I said, we like to cast instant sorcery, so let's keep dealing the damage. Mana barbs, whenever a player taps land for mana, deal 1 damage to that player, except potentially dealing that 4 or 10, depending on what you got on the board there. Pyrohemia, at the end of the turn, no creatures in play, sacrifice it, but pay 1 red, deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. So you're essentially board wiping. Only thing is you have to watch out because that would also remove Ojer, so only do it if you, have some way to protect him. Rolling Vortex. Each upkeep, Rolling Vortex deals 1 damage to them. That's each player's upkeep, so that is us as well. And also, it's whenever a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than Ojer's. Oh, it does say to an opponent. Never mind, I was going to say. I think it says to each player, but nope. So we're taking 1 damage, our opponents are taking a whole bunch of damage. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana is spent to cast it, deal 5 damage to that player. It's not going to happen too often in a casual pod, but still could be helpful. And also, you could get rid of those pesky life gain decks by making so they can't gain life for a little bit. Sulfuric Vortex. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, deal 2 damage to that player, except we're dealing 4 to them. So we have a bunch of ways to make sure our opponents, just start losing the game by playing the game. Underworld Breach, in order to make sure that, we have the instant sorceries to cast. We're going to be having plenty of ways to cast instant sorceries, but let's make sure we keep on going. Urbrass for 4 mana. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, 1 damage to target opponent, and some red mana, making sure you can keep going with that play. You can also transform him eventually into the Great Work. 3 damage to target opponent and each creature they control, except it's going to be 4 to each. And then create 3 treasure tokens, and then until end of turn, you may cast instant sorcery spells from any graveyard. Spells cast this way will be put into a graveyard exiled instead. So if your opponent's also playing a storm-type deck, you have a way to remove their stuff, so that they can't get it back from their graveyard with their Underworld Breach. And then for the meat and potatoes of the deck, we have our instants and sorceries. We have a Braid for a little bit of removal and a little bit of damage. Big Score for that draw power, discard a card, draw 2, and create some treasure tokens. So we keep on going on future turns. Bolt Bend. This way, when our opponent tries targeting our Ojer with an ability, we could have it target something else, because we're going to have a creature power 4 or greater. Bulk Up, double target creature's power and toughness to end the turn. So if you do cast this, you do deal the 4 damage, but then anyone after that, you're going to be dealing the 8 damage, because it's on cast that you're dealing the damage, and this doesn't resolve until after the cast. Chaos Warp for a little bit of removal, and allowing your opponent to get their best thing out of their deck. Demand Answers for that draw power to make sure you keep on going. Flick a Coin, deal 1 damage to any target, you create a treasure token. Except we're not dealing just 1 damage, we're dealing 4 damage, and we're going to draw that card on top of it. Gutshot, 1 damage to target creature or player, except it's 4. For only the cost of 2 life, we could get rid of 4 of our opponent's life, or more, depending on what power Ojer has. Where were we? Lava Part, 1 damage to target creature or player. Once again, dealing 4. Flashback it for sacrificing a mountain. That's worth the cost normally at a certain point in the game, because you'll have plenty of treasure tokens off some other abilities in order to cast it. But yeah, pretty good ability there. Dealing a 4 to each opponent. Lightning Bolt, deal 3 damage to each opponent. Sometimes you might not always have Ojer on the board, so a little bit of extra damage is always nice. Limb Bloom, Industrial Regency. Another way to deal 1 damage to each opponent, but it is a wizard, so it doesn't get that benefit. Needle Drop, 1 damage to target creature or player that was dealt damage this turn. Everyone's going to be being dealt damage this turn, so that's going to be any player that we want. Seething Song for some additional mana, so we could storm off for just 1 mega good turn. Shock for some additional damage, potentially 4. Draw a Possibility for that additional draw power, that additional spell to keep on digging, draw our deck in order to make sure we keep dealing more and more damage. Unleash Fury, double the power of target creature until end of turn. Swing in with Ojer, deal 8 damage with Ojer instead of just a 4. Untimely Malfunction for some removal and a little bit of protection on top of that. And then Virtue of Courage, 2 damage to any target, except it's going to be 4 damage to each opponent. And whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, exile that many cards from the top of your library. You may play those cards this turn. I mean, you need to watch it where your deck totals at with that one sometimes is the only thing to worry about. Spikefield Hazard's also a land, but its main ability that we're looking for is deal 1 damage to any target. If a permanent dealt damage this way would die this turn, exiled instead. So, normally a good source of removal, but also could just be 4 damage to our opponent's face. Blasphemous Act for a board wipe. Bolt Wave for 3 damage to each opponent, potentially 4 damage to each opponent. Potentially, I think we have 2 power doublers, so potentially 16 damage to each opponent. Earthquake, X damage to each creature without flying, and each player. You know, you don't always need to win with Ojer on the board. Sometimes you just need that final push. Playing 10 mana into that. End the festivities, 1 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. Each planeswalker. Each player. Everything. 1 damage to everything. So it's 4 damage to everything. Fiery Confluence, 1 damage to each creature, 2 damage to each opponent, or destroy target artifact. So a little bit of removal, a little bit of damage to each creature, a little bit of damage to each opponent. But it's going to be a lot because you get to choose 3 of them. You choose just the same mode 3 times, 6 damage to each opponent, except it's 12 damage to each opponent if you have Ojer on the board. Grab the prize for that draw power to keep digging through your deck, along with 2 damage to each opponent. Grape Shot, 1 damage to any target, except we're going to storm off, so it's going to be multiple instances of 1 damage, which is going to make it multiple instances of 4 damage. Jessica's Well, in order to get the mana that we need in order to cast all of our spells, have that big turn, and along with digging through our deck to make sure we get the cards that we want. Mana Clash. You and target opponent each flip a coin, deal 1 damage to each player whose coin flip comes up tails. Repeat the process until both players come up heads. It's a 25% chance of that happening. So you're gonna potentially deal a lot of damage to your opponent. Potentially a lot of damage to yourself, but you're taking 1 damage for every 4 damage they take. Mana Geyser for that mana that we need for our big turn. Rain of Embers, 1 damage to each creature and each player. So 4 damage to each creature and each player. Tectonic Hazard, 1 damage to each opponent and each creature they control, except it's going to be 4 damage to each player and each creature they control. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and also this is just, when I say 1 damage, 4 damage to each opponent and each creature they control, I mean, it deals 4 damage to each opponent and then 1 damage to each creature they control. Tormenting Hazard, keep digging through your deck. Vandal Blast for getting rid of all those artifacts on the board, so we stay ahead while our opponents get a little bit more behind. Volcanic Spray, 1 damage to each creature without flying, and each player, so 4 damage to each player. And then Witch's Mark to make sure we keep digging through our deck so that we could keep on going with that big turn. But that's the deck there. We'll be covering the other Legends of Ixalan, well, Legends of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan that I just personally enjoy out of the set. But yeah, if you guys like the video, make sure you like the video. Comment of how you'd like to build the deck, and subscribe if you'd like to see more like this. And overall, just have a great rest of the day.